so the truth tellers are quieted by the marketers. And when you go out into the, quote, natural food industry, most of these poor people, including most of the, quote, alternative doctors, don't have the vaguest idea of what we're teaching you here tonight. And it's pretty damn sad. But if I take a 6-year-old child and sit that little girl down and say to her, listen, if I take something and I make it in a laboratory and give it to you, or if I take a vegetable out of a garden and give it to you, which is better? I'll bet $1 million that a 6-year-old child knows the right answer. Now, where is it that we're so damn bright we have no sense anymore? But most of you just go along your busy lives, you're working hard, you're with your family, you're exhausted, and you want to trust somebody. And I'm here to tell you, there's one other group you can't trust. The so-called natural supplement industry that's not natural. In your country, by the way, the law states, to put the word natural on the side of a supplement, all I need is 10% natural. Look this up, by the way. 10% natural. You know, it's like saying, I'm going to swim, but what you really do is put your toe in and pull it out. It's a big difference between natural. Even worse than that, to put the word organic on a supplement today. Listen closely. I have to have 1 atom of nitrogen. What's that have to do with anything organic? Because the word organic doesn't really mean the word organic. In Europe, they were wise enough to call things biological, ecological. In Scandinavia and Germany, they call it ecological food. Or, in the French-speaking countries, biological food. Here, like idiots, we call it organic food. And we trust it's organic, sure. Everything's organic. You're organic. Should I put a label on your butt and have you walk around? Some of you would have to have a goddamn big labor. I thought that was funny. Now listen. This gets outrageous when you think. Vitamin E. Study after study. I've read them I must have read 40 studies over the last 40 years. Not one a year, but clumps over the years. Vitamin E has been shown to be better and more effective than anticoagulants. How many of you here are on a blood thinner? Raise your hand. And how many of you here know people on a blood thinner? Raise your hand. Everyone. And 40 studies over the short time I've done this work show vitamin E works. Sadly, whole food vitamin E works better and doesn't hurt you in the process. How many of you know that the vast majority of vitamin E is made out of turpentine? Turpentine. Well, you think that's bad? How many of you know that 92% of supplements on the market, almost every one of them, are made out of petrochemicals? Challenge me. Bring the smartest guy from your country and let's have a debate here. You know what coal tar is? You drove here tonight on coal tar. That's how they make vitamin B. So the first time, even though the indigenous people thousands of years ago realized there was a life force in food, that we started to identify it, was in the 1700s with a young surgeon, a British surgeon, called what? Lind. Admiral Lind. And Lind realized, which I learned in my research over the last few years to put this book together, that when he put his sailors on limes and lemons, they didn't die from scurvy. Now they didn't know what was in it, but they knew. He was the first guy in modern times that said, hey, here's a substance that when we feed our sailors it, they don't die. Now what was a shock to find out, some of you may know this, I was shocked, that why sailors were the top paid people in the world then, is it was expected 1/2 of them, 50% of them would die on long trips. Did you know that? How many of you knew that? Raise your hand. I was like, I had to read that 5 times before I got it through my head. And so Lind was like, at first considered an idiot, and the next generation a hero. And why we call the British the Limeys is because of Lind. Isn't that interesting? Now, later they found out that limes eventually rot, so what did they start using? Anyone know? Chickpeas. Now the British should be happy Lynn didn't use them first. They'd be called chickies now. It's a nicer name in a way. I'm not a chickie. Yes, you're a chickie. But chickpeas have a shocking high amount of vitamin C in them. And by the way, you can put a chickpea in a boat, fly around the world and float it around the world for 30 years and still sprout the thing if you keep it dry. Okay. Now the first guy that named a supplement was also a British guy. The British had a corner on the market there for several hundred years. And his name was young Dr. Fletcher. Come on, let's say it. Young Dr. Fletcher. I love the way they talk over there. Don't know what the hell they're saying, but they're talking. I know. I saw you over there. So Fletcher identifies out of the side of brown rice something we called B3. Now little did he know that it was going to eventually become a family over the next several decades. But he isolated B3 and found it where? In a whole living form of brown rice. And they identified, because I read the literature, I read what he wrote, that when you processed it and cooked it, no longer did you have active B3. Interesting. Here's a guy who discovers the very first nutrient, and he writes that down. Between 1905, when that happened, that was what? 104 years ago. That's when supplements were born. By the 1930s, they identified what Lynn discovered in the 1700s and called it absorbic acid. And how they did it was around the back way. They found out that in the pancreas there was something called hexagonic acid. And the hexagonic acid was literally vitamin C. And then they could identify what came out of the human anatomy, biochemistry, and put it into perspective and said foods have a very, very identical chemical and called it vitamin C. But by 1933, it was synthesized. Aha! Now why did they start synthesizing things? You ever hear them say, follow the money? Well, follow the money. Now take a breath and you're going to get this pretty simply. When I create vitamin C, it costs more money every year. You know why? Because every year it costs more money to have humans go out with their hands and collect the berries, collect the foods. Every year it costs more money to do that. And bring it back and put it through this very laborious process. So it's not cooked and not processed and not chemicalized and not extracted. The average nutrient that we make and a few other small companies make, only 8% of us, most of those companies, not all of them, spend 2 to 3 days getting what's in a food or an herb out to make a whole food bioactive, meaning alive, bioavailable nutrient. Do you know how long it takes to make vitamin C that you don't collect with your hands from berries? No time. Once they had the formula for absorbic acid in 1930, out of the hexagonic acid, by 1933, they created that. The average profit, listen closely, the average profit in a bottle of vitamin C is 2,500%. And most of what they spend is advertising. And Linus Pauling, it was a double-edged sword, put vitamin C on the map, and he was so diligent, articulate, and understandable, he did a spectacular job. You go to the pharmaceutical industry that makes what percentage of all supplements? 85%. They probably have a picture of the president of the pharmaceutical industry this big, but Linus Pauling's picture this big. Because he single-handedly created the second aspirin. What can you buy that doesn't have vitamin C in it? You buy slip covers. They're enriched by vitamin C. Have you ever had shoes with vitamin C in it? I mean, there's nothing they don't put vitamin C in anymore. He literally created the second aspirin.